This is my story. It's not the story for SpaceX. And one of the things I did in my early evaluation that I will probably follow up and do on the post-prospectus valuation is I introduced the uncertainty I feel about the estimates. That the total addressable market for AI could be much bigger. That they will find a way for gross margins to improve. The way this will play out, instead of having a point estimate valuation, which is what we're taught to do in valuation classes, this makes your big inputs into distributions. And what it'll create is a distribution of value. And distributions of values are good to counter hubris, because what that'll show you is this is my estimate of value. This is how wrong I can be. That's one piece of output you should get from this is, you have an estimate, but you could be wrong. And the other is when somebody else comes with a different number. If somebody says, is it possible that SpaceX is worth $2 trillion? Of course it is, given the uncertainty about the future. And if someone else insisted that they think SpaceX is worth $2 trillion, who am I to contest them? They have a story. They want to put their money behind it. So I value for an audience of one, which is me. And for me, this is a company that has great promise. I think it's an engineering marvel, an amazing company, a company that perhaps only Elon Musk could have created, by thinking out of the box and hiring incredible engineers. But at 2 trillion, 2.2 trillion, 2.7 trillion, that's a bridge too far for me to cross. And for me, it's a great company, but at the wrong price.
I think what's so interesting about your framework is you're trying to bridge two competing camps, right? There's your kind of numerically driven value investors who say price to sales ratio 100, negative net income, like no thanks, pass, like no way. And then you have your kind of more story driven narrative investors who they hear the story you told and perhaps inflate it even further. And they're like, yeah, 2.7 trillion. That's what the market's trading. So obviously someone believes that that's the correct valuation. And so what you're trying to do, what's so interesting with your framework is, through the decomposition into sum of parts and then kind of interrogating the assumptions around, say, TAM, unit economics, and then reinvestment requirements, putting together a framework by which now anyone who has your spreadsheet can download it and ask the question of, if I'm at 2.7 trillion, like where am I differing from you?
Well, what does the gross margin have to be? Or you can remember an Excel spreadsheet, you can solve for any input. How big does the market have to be? What does the gross margin have to be for this to play out? And then decide for yourself, is that something? When I teach my valuation classes, one of the first questions I ask my students is, what are you more comfortable with? Working with numbers or telling stories? And because I have MBAs who come from very different backgrounds, of course, there are quant-oriented people who say, I like working with numbers, and storytelling people who essentially, and in the investing world, this plays out in the form of, if you go to bankers, especially old-time bankers or value investors, they're very focused on EBITDA and revenues and multiples and trying to make sense of that. And if you go to VCs and founders, they're big storytellers. They say, my problem with both sides, if you stay in your camp, is you're missing big parts of what you do. The number crunchers are so focused on what's there now that they forget that this is not a company. It's the analogy I would offer is this is like having a kindergartner's report card and extrapolating from that what they will be doing in college, which is essentially what you're getting with the SpaceX financial statement. There's not much there. And there's not much there because financial statements reflect your history and you don't have much in your history. My problem with the storytelling that I hear is it stops with the total addressable market. That seems, I've watched CNBC as to why SpaceX should be worth $2 trillion. And your story does it. It's a big market. And then I wait for the rest of the story and it doesn't come. And here's my problem. This is a business. I don't get value from having a big market. I've got to take that big market. I've got to monetize it as revenues for me. So I need to get your story as to why I am going to be a beneficiary of that big market, which requires that you talk about the relative advantages of Grok versus OpenAI versus Claude versus Gemini. You need to get at least a working acquaintance of those. And then you got to talk about unit economics, which is how much are you going to charge for your product. There are a lot of these stories are incomplete. Incomplete stories are basically a recipe for essentially doing what everybody else is doing. In other words, these are not stories that tell you whether you should be buying the stock. They're stories used because you've already decided you want to own SpaceX and you're looking for a justification for why that was okay. We all do it. Numbers people do it, story people do it. We make decisions first and then we look for rationalizations later. It's human nature. What I'm trying to do is slow the process down because, like everybody else, I have instincts that lead me to want to do something. I want to slow the process down and give my rational side a chance to at least mount an argument.